Go.
Cato's letter number 5. A further call for vengeance upon the South Sea plunderers, and a caution against false patriots. Signed, Thomas Gordon. Published in the London Journal, Saturday, December 3rd, 1720.
Sir, this great nation, undone by despicable stock jobbers and their abettors, has hitherto quietly groaned under the merciless hand of its pillagers, and lived for some months upon the pure hopes of redress. We look towards Parliament, His Majesty, and his ministry being absent, and busy with the affairs of the kingdom abroad, in the glorious aims of settling the peace of Europe, in strengthening the Protestant interest.
The first part of our hopes is now almost accomplished. The Parliament are just upon meeting, and never, sure, did ever session open with greater expectation, or with more to do. Everything is turned topsy-turvy, and the nation, thrown into convulsions, is waiting for the healing hand of its representatives.
Many expedients will, no doubt, be offered without doors, calculated in appearance to improve the stock, but in reality designed to save the directors. This is to begin at the wrong end, to pretend to form schemes for the increasing of credit before the destroyers, the cannibals of credit, are honestly and openly hung up to its manes, is, in some sort, to confess that we had our instructions and politics from the criminals themselves, and our best and only reasons out of their purses.
Or if we be not thus wicked, we should, at best, be miserably weak to fall into such preposterous method. And whether great and general calamities have their root in roguery or folly, is all one to a nation.
In spite of all the remedies that can be applied, multitudes will still remain undone beyond all remedy. Nay, for aught I can see, there is no practical remedy at all for what is past. So effectual has been the roguery on one side, so riveted is the ruin on the other.
All, therefore, that seems to me to be left, even to the united wisdom of Great Britain, is the cure of prevention, to stop the progress of the contagion, to take care that those who have already suffered shall suffer no more, nor make new sufferers. It is certain that all men have suffered in one sense or other, the criminals excepted. It is hoped that the miserable people will now be honored with their good company, and that the box on the ear, which wantonly began from them, will in good earnest be returned to them, and end with them. It is some consolation to the inhabitants of a village, who have been bit all round by a mad dog, to see the instrument of the poison, and the author of their pain and danger, honestly hung up or knocked on the head.
The prevailing woe which has long raged, and still sits hard and heavy upon us, has certainly some authors. The directors are generally taken to be these authors, and if they be duly and publicly punished, they will continue to be taken for the only authors. But if there be nothing done to them, or nothing effectually done, we shall naturally look farther, and make bold to know that though they have been rogues, yet that others had been greater than they, that others have directed the directors and were partners in the spoil.
But if they stand single, and are found the only and original plunderers of their country, they will infallibly be given up to the public and crying vengeance, not only by the rules of guilt, but of good policy. A more popular thing cannot be done, nor indeed so popular a thing. The blessings of the people and the universal affections of Great Britain will be some of the rewards attending upon those who will be the generous authors of public justice, upon the detestable authors of public and intense misery.
I will never suppose that any men, or even one man in any public station, did by any means join with the stock jobbers to undo their country, much less enabled stock jobbers to undo their country, and supported them while they were about it. It would be melancholy and terrible indeed to imagine that any public men, at least any man concerned in the finances or set over any part of the public money, by which public credit is circulated and sustained, should, in defiance of his public trust, put himself at the head of a conspiracy of stock jobbers who were, with merciless and unclean hands, rifling the public itself, engrossing all its wealth, and destroying at once all public and private faith.
Such unprecedented treachery, such overgrown guilt can never be supposed. Our corruptions cannot yet become so bold and barefaced, nor we so tame. The thing, therefore, being so very monstrous, must be impossible, whatsoever suggestions there may be to the contrary, which, were they true, could not fail of calling down double and conspicuous punishment upon such averres.
As to those who lately encouraged the scheme out of an honest purpose to relieve the public and pay off its debts, they ought, and no doubt will be, the first and the most active to revenge the public upon those who, instead of relieving it, have brought the public into such doleful and dying distress.
By this, they will further evince the honesty of that purpose, merit still more to conduct our affairs, and their services will undoubtedly be remembered by the honest freeholders of England, at a proper season, to their advantage. Our eyes are upon them, our confidence is in them, and we wish them good success in this great trial of integrity and public spirit.
I foresee that there will be many loud in their call for public justice, and yet be the first to prevent it. Their avarice will arm their tongues with zeal, and a proper present disarm it of its eloquence. However, the outside of public spirit will still be kept on. They will be sure to cry out to the last for punishment, for severe punishment, but they will be as sure to find fault with every expedient proposed for inflicting it. I could name some worthy patriots of many words and great weight who will act this farce rarely. It will not be the first time. What is human life but a masquerade? And what is civil society but a mock alliance between hypocrisy and credulity?
Magna et misera civitas, eodam anno tantas injurias tantumque, pudorum passa, inter Vineos, Fabios, Icelos, Asiaticos, varia et pudenda sorte agebat, donec successere Mutianus et Marcellus, et magis ali homines quam ali mores.
These are the words of a great ancient, signal for his wisdom and strong observations. Had he lived now and written in English, he would have written thus: O London, O England, O my country, how great and yet how miserable! What reproach, what calamities, what ruin hast thou sustained? Sustained in the space of one short year and less than a year. Sustained from the dregs of humankind, from fellows vile in their original, and as to their spirit, slaves. What opprobrious delusions, what deadly revolutions hast thou suffered to be brought upon thee by the ignoble names and servile hands of BT, LBT, HH, and the like scum of the vulgar. And after all this, art thou not weary, O my country, of thy own shame? Not yet satiated with the devastation and havoc? And wilt thou yet again try the old knavery managed by new names? New knaves? I am, etc.
Cato's letter number 6. How easily the people are bubbled by deceivers. Further caution against deceitful remedies for the public sufferings from the wicked execution of the South Sea scheme. Signed, Thomas Gordon. Published in the London Journal, Saturday, December 10th, 1720.
Sir, no experience or suffering can cure the world of its credulity. It has been a bubble from the beginning, nor is it a bit wiser for this discovery, but still runs into old snares if they have but new names, often whether they have or no.
Self-love beguiles men into false hopes, and they will venture to incur 100 probable evils to catch one possible good. Nay, they run frequently into distracting pains and expenses to gain advantages which are purely imaginary and utterly impossible.
Were the passions properly balanced, men would act rationally. But by suffering one passion to get the better of all the rest, they act madly or ridiculously.
Our prevailing passions in England of late have been hope, avarice, and ambition, which have had such a headlong force upon the people that they are become wretched and poor, by a ravenous appetite to grow great and rich. Our fear and caution are postponed, and by a sanguine struggle for what we had not, we lost what we had. Could such courage be inspired by stock jobbing, a cowardly science of mean tricks and lies?
Every adventurer in this mighty lottery foresaw that many must be losers, and that what was got by one must be lost by another. But every man hoped that fate would be kinder to him in particular than to 1,000 others. And so this mad hope became general, as are the calamities which it has produced.
This shows the little power that reason and truth have over the passions of men when they run high. In the late revolution in the alley, figures in demonstration would have told them, and the directors could have told them, that it was frenzy, that they were pursuing gilded clouds, the composition of vapor and a little sunshine, both fleeting apparitions. Common sense would have told them that credit is the most uncertain and most fluctuating thing in the world, especially when it is applied to stock jobbing, that it had long before been exalted higher than it could well stand, even before it was come to 20 above par, and therefore always tottered, and was always tumbling down at every little accident and rumor. A story of a Spanish frigate, or of a few thieves in the dark dens in the Highlands, or the sickness of a foreign prince, or the saying of a broker in a coffee house, all or any of these contemptible causes were able to reduce that same credit into a very slender figure, and sometimes within her old bounds. But particularly they might have seen that it was now mounted to such an outrageous height as all the silver and gold in Europe could not support, and therefore, when people come into any considerable number to sell, and to sell was the whole end of their buying, it would have a dreadful fall, even to the crushing of the nation. This has since dolefully happened. Our hopes, which were our ruin, are gone, and now we behold nothing but the face of the mourner.
But in spite of this mischief produced by credulity, by manifest and ill-grounded credulity, it is much to be feared that some little art and big promises would make us repeat it and grow mad again. This seems evident not only from the folly and feebleness of human nature, ever the prey of craft and ever caught with shadows, but from our endless gaping after new projects and our eagerness to run into them. We have been bruised in a mortar, but we are not wiser. While one ruin is yet upon us, we are panting after another, perhaps worked up by the same hands, or by other hands with the same views.
Oh, the weakness and folly of man! It is like a whirlpool, which destroys and drowns not by halves, but when a part is drawn in, the whole follows.
Surely the pleasure is as great of being cheated as to cheat, else men would not be such dupes as everywhere they are. Whoever would catch mankind has nothing to do but to throw out a bait to their passions, and infallibly they are his property. This secret is well known to corrupt courts who flatter or frighten their obeying, believing vassals into all the excesses of misery and obeisance. By this, standing armies have been maintained. By this, wild wars have been waged. By this, an idle, expensive, absurd, and cruel popish hierarchy has been supported.
Once more, O wretched man, thou willing instrument of thy own bondage and delusion. Even mountebanks know this secret of cajoling thee, and picking thy pocket. Nay, worse than mountebanks, stock jobbers know it.
When a people are undone, it is some consolation to reflect that they had no hand in their own ruin, or did all that they could to prevent it by the best counsels that they could take, or by the bravest defense that they could make. But alas, poor England, thou hast not that consolation. Thou hast not fallen by able traitors. Thou art not the victim of deep design or artful treason, nor art thou the price of victory in the field. Neither art thou outwitted by the subtle dealers in mystery and distinction, nor in this instance deceived by their false alarms.
No, we have no such palliating reflection to reconcile us to our misery, or to abate its pangs. To our deathless shame, we are the conquest, the purchase of stock jobbers. The British lions crouch to a nest of owls. Can we survive the remembrance without revenge?
But all this is complaining, will some say, and we want remedies rather than complaints. To bewail our calamities is indeed natural, but to extricate ourselves out of them is necessary. Here are 200 millions of imaginary property lost, and at least 20 millions of real property plundered from the honest and industrious and given to sharpers and pickpockets. Shall those rooks be suffered to enjoy it? Shall the bubbles be redressed out of other men's estates, no way chargeable with the mischief? Or must we prostitute the public honor of the nation to draw in other people, no way concerned, to take the bold bargains of rash men and dupes off their hands? But if none of these methods be taken, our cullies must sit down with their loss, or the traders be forced to disgorge.
If we make new schemes or diversify the old till doomsday, there will be no paying 20 millions without 20 millions, or without what is equivalent to 20 millions, which will be the same thing to the nation as the parting with 20 millions.
The payment, therefore, will either be a real payment or a sham payment. And in this case, if caveat emptor, let the buyer look into it, be a good general rule in the business of bargains and sale, it will be a good rule here too.
If we have any state chemists who have art enough to make millions evaporate into smoke, yet I must beg leave to doubt their skill at consolidating smoke into gold.
I hope that I shall not be understood by what I have said to oppose any attempt to redeem us out of our present wretched condition. On the contrary, I shall be the first to vote that man a statue of gold who can strike out an honest and skillful expedient for our recovery, which I own is far past my own skill. I am no candidate for the golden statue.
By all this, I would only caution my countrymen not to be caught again. Let them beware of new snares. As to the losers, they have not a great deal to expect, and I can say no more to them here than that in the countries where the plague rages, the preservation of the whole is the principal care. The infected are, for the most part, left to care for themselves. And I have never heard it suggested that 9 millions of people ought to be exposed to the mortal contagion of that distemper to preserve a few individuals. G. I am, etc. Cato's letter number 93, an essay upon heroes. Signed, Thomas Gordon. Published in the London Journal, Saturday, September 8th, 1722.
Sir, I designed this letter as a dissertation upon heroes, who were at first a sort of brave, disinterested men, that having more courage and prowess than others, went about doing good to others, and to all, at their own expense and danger. They established and reformed communities, and taught them laws, and punished those who violated justice and law. They destroyed public robbers and monsters, and the greatest of all public robbers and monsters, tyrants, and lived the patterns of virtue and useful valor. Hence they were called heroes, a sort of middle beings, superior to other men and akin to the gods.
But so wild is the nature of man, and so impudent the nature of ambition, that whereas the primitive heroes were the bulwarks of society and the preservers of men, those who pretended to succeed them were the disturbers of society and the destroyers of men. And such tyrants and monsters as the old heroes had destroyed did themselves, impudently, set up for heroes. with the same modesty, superstition, which destroys religion, has in the greatest part of the world usurped the place of religion. Tyranny, which is the extirpation of government, calls itself government. And thus arose persecuting priests and lawless kings. But so are words in the world abused, and with so much safety, and even applause is mischief committed, when it has but a good name.
Alexander deified himself, and Caesar was deified by others for being universal murderers, and Cook of Berry was hanged for attempting one murder. Had he been at the head of 100,000 cutthroats and murdered 1,000,000, he might have been recorded a hero, his name handed down to after ages with eulogiums and public declamations made in the schools upon his conduct and virtues.
Child, the highwayman, robbed the mail and was put to death. But instead of the mail, had he robbed a nation, I mean any nation but this, he might probably have governed it, and, instead of hanging in chains, led a whole people in chains, and been dubbed an able statesman and a faithful minister.
Mischief is inseparable from the profession of a present hero, whose business and ambition is to multiply conquests and consequently miseries upon those whom he conquers. What a wild and inhuman spirit! To plague the world in order to make a figure in it, to commit great villainies for a good name, to destroy the peace and prosperity of mankind to gain their esteem, and to shed their blood to show themselves fit to govern them. For none gain by such accomplishment of theirs but their soldiers, whose lives they throw away as wantonly as these take away the lives of others. The chief gainers, therefore, are only a few officers, servants, and strumpets, who are about their persons, and execute their will and rage for their own ends. And so, to glut a restless tyrant and his instruments, men and nations must be slaughtered or enslaved. This is the heroism, this is the glory of conquering.
Such is the difference between the old original heroes and these their apes, who by fraud, violence, perjury, and restless cruelty make war upon their subjects and neighbors, and by sacrificing the virtuous and the brave, or by making them their instruments to sacrifice others, and by distressing, exhausting, plundering, and chaining, all push human misery as far as it can go. These are the wolves and tigers of the human race, imperial beasts of prey who, if the world would preserve itself, ought to be driven out of the world, or hung up in it in terrorem. Or, like these their more innocent brethren, who only kill for food, be locked up in dens and shown as they are for monsters. Or perhaps it would be still a more equitable punishment, if they could be caught, to shut up a number of them in a madhouse with their beloved arms about them, there to fight and tear one another's flesh, and spill their own detestable blood, till they had no more to spill. This would be giving a sort of satisfaction to mankind, for so much human blood outrageously and wantonly spilt.
But this is not the only mock heroism in the world. There is yet another sort, as mischievous, but still more ridiculous, and that is a violent appetite for war and victory and conquest without engaging personally in the danger or coming near it, but being very valorous by proxy and fond of fighting without drawing a sword. This was the prudent bravery of a late-aged conqueror who was never tired of war, yet never tired his own person in it. In the heat of a battle fought for his glory, he ran no risk, but sat securely at a great distance with the wise old woman his mistress, waiting for laurels of other people's winning. When his agents had bought a town for him treacherously, or his generals stolen a province as treacherously, still it was victory, still fair conquest, and the glory was his at 300 league distance. For everything that he did was glorious, the meanest and the basest things, and by these means he became immortal, immortal in conquest without a scar.
The primitive heroes ventured their lives for the good of others. These mock heroes expose others to danger and death for the good of themselves and their own personal renown, and all the time stay at home, and wait for fame in a whole skin. They slaughter thousands who obey them, and undo millions who ought not to obey them, and all to enslave others, who neither wish nor do them any harm, and with whom they have nothing at all to do. Even most of the instruments which they make use of are made as miserable as they make those whom they oppress, and few or none share the benefit of the plunder, but such as, wanting merit of their own to gain an honest subsistence, prey upon the industry of those that do. So strongly does misery thrive under their influence and nothing else.
They keep themselves poor, suspicious, and in a state of war with their own subjects, whom they justly suspect for their worst enemies, because they supply them with constant reasons to be so. And therefore they live in a perpetual state of rapine and enmity toward them, and in a continued dread of violence and revolts from them. Instead of giving them fatherly protection on one side and receiving from them dutiful and sincere allegiance on the other, and all for the fruitless and imaginary glory of conquest and of dominion over their fellow creatures against their will, or in other words, of being skillful pillagers and oppressors and successful murderers.
It is, however, not to be wondered at that whilst so many princes are beset with sycophants, always ready to applaud at a venture, their wildest sallies and designs, or with traitors who, finding their own vile advantages in them, are ever determined to abet and execute them. I say, is it not strange that princes in these circumstances should run frequently into wild freaks and pernicious enterprises to the ruin of themselves and their subjects? But it is stupendous that these their baneful instruments and worst foes should be able, in any instance, to persuade nations to dance after their destructive maggots, and be contented to be undone, to make some of the worst of men amongst themselves rich and saucy.
What have the people in any monarchical government ever gained by the conquests made by their prince, but to be made slaves? Or if they were slaves before, worse slaves, and to have their chains riveted yet faster? For besides that these conquests give him a pretense and ability to keep more troops, and consequently increase his power over them, the conquered nation will find a sort of revenge in joining to reduce their new masters to the same wretched condition with themselves, and perhaps find an opportunity of conquering the conquerors. One nation will be played upon another, and neither will be trusted to the guard of their own countrymen, but the soldiers of one country will be quartered upon the other and kept at a great distance from home, lest by constant conversation with their relations, friends, and neighbors, they should, contrary to their duty, warp towards the love and interests of their country. And indeed, in most countries where troops are kept, they are always moved from place to place to prevent their friendship and correspondence with the natives.
What did England gain formerly by their conquests upon the continent, but constant wars, slaughter, and poverty to themselves, and to their princes precarious foreign provinces at an English expense? And had standing armies been then the fashion of the world, England would doubtless have conquered itself into slavery. The Romans, when they had extended their conquests so far and wide that they were forced to keep provincial armies to awe and preserve the conquered countries, became a prey to those armies, and their emperors afterwards durst no longer trust to Roman troops, but increased their slavery by the help of those nations whom they had conquered, and who became, in their turns, masters of those who had mastered them.
When Alexander had ventured his own army of Macedonians and the best men in Greece to ruin Persia and a great part of the world which had given him no provocation, what advantages did Greece and Macedon reap from his mighty victories and conquests, but to become a little province of a great barbarous empire, which by their arms and prowess he conquered, and exhausted them of all their bravest men to preserve? Their condition would still have been worse if he had left a successor behind him to have preserved his whole empire entire, who would have made Persia or some other province the seat of it, and governed Greece at a distance by bashaws. And it was, he left it in a state of constant war and depredation, and they were tossed and tumbled from one oppression to another till they found a sort of relief in being conquered by the Romans.
What did the French gain by the long wars and many conquests of their late great monarch, but extreme poverty, straighter servitude, great depopulation, and general bankruptcy? So much did they suffer by his acquisitions, and so dear did they pay for his pernicious glory.
What did the Swedes gain by the conquests of the late king, but to lose them again as they got them at a vast expense of blood and treasure, and to be reduced to such weakness as to want the assistance of their neighbors to preserve them from falling under the power of a prince whom, by conquering him, they taught to conquer them?
And if by the conquering countries are such miserable losers by conquest, what must be the doleful condition of the conquered, which are considered only as the sources of plunder and the professed objects of oppression? Almost all Europe are witness of the brutish havoc which the conquerors make, and of the dismal scenes of ruin that they leave behind them. If the late French king could have conquered or bought or surprised the United Provinces, which by all these generous means he endeavored, from the richest and most populous republic upon earth, they would have been now a nest of beggarly fishermen, and in a lower condition, if possible, than any of the fine French provinces, which had the honor of being governed by that paternal prince. Never was such mockery as for a prince to publish reasons to a people, with whom he had nothing to do, which they should be conquered by him, when, let their condition be ill as it will, it is 100 to 1, nay, it is almost certain that he will make it 10 times worse.
Alas for that nation whose prince is a hero, says an excellent and amiable French writer, who saw with sorrow the woeful condition of his own nation from the merciless and unnatural affectation of heroism in the then king.
The same admirable author, in another place, gives us a lively image of heroes and conquests in these worlds, which he makes Telemachus speak, as he views the field of battle filled with carcasses and drenched with blood.
Such are the heavy evils that follow wars. What blind fury urges unhappy mortals? So few are the days that they have to live upon this earth, and so miserable do they make those few days. Why will they run thus headlong into the jaws of death, which is of itself making hasty approaches to devour them? Why add so many frightful desolations to a short and bitter life, made so by heaven already? Men are all brethren, and they tear and butcher one another, more unnaturally and fierce and cruel than the wild beasts of the desert. Lions make not war upon lions, nor tigers upon tigers. They attack only animals of a different species. Man alone, in spite of his reason, does things that creatures without reason would never do.
But why these consuming wars? Is there not land enough in the universe to satisfy all men with more than they can cultivate? Are there not vast tracts of desert lands, so vast that mankind is not sufficient to fill them? How then? A false glory, a vain title of conqueror, which a prince is fond of, kindles a war far and wide, and one single man, thrown by heaven into the world in wrath, sacrifices brutally so many others to his vanity. His glory requires it, and all must perish before him. Countries swim in blood, towns and cities suffer devouring flames, and what escapes from the sword and the fire, famine, more cruel than both, must consume. And all that this man, who thus sports himself with throwing all human nature into pangs, may find in this general destruction his pleasure and his glory. What monstrous glory! Can we too much despise, too much abhor these monstrous men who have thus forgot humanity? Without being men, they set up for demigods and earn the curses, instead of what they aim at, the admiration of ages to come.
Oh, with what tenderness should princes undertake wars! That they ought to be strictly just is not enough. They must be strictly necessary for the public good. The blood of the people ought never to be shed, but to save the people. and the occasion ought to be extreme. But flattering counsels, false ideas of glory, vain jealousies, boundless rapaciousness under the specious disguises, and rash engagements draw almost all princes precipitately or insensibly into wars which prove fatal to them. In them they hazard all without necessity, and do as much mischief to their subjects as to their enemies.
Thus the divine late Archbishop of Cambrai, from whom I have translated this affecting passage. It is a book that has 10,000 excellencies, and ought to be read by all mankind. I will conclude with wishing that all nations would learn the wisdom of the prudent Sancho, who, when the hero his master madly attacked the windmills and the lions, stood at a safe distance in a whole skin. If their governing Don Quixotes will fight, right or wrong, let them fight by themselves, and not sit at home and wantonly sacrifice their people against windmills and fulling mills. G. I am, etc.